Joining us now for more on the government's response to the global pandemic is Representative Ted Yoho, the congressman serving the 3rd District of Florida. Congressman, we finally saw some progress being made on that, the most recent stimulus package, as we're calling it, giving more relief to small businesses, specifically through that PPP program. Are you pleased with what we've seen coming out of the Senate so far?
Yeah, I am. I think they stayed pretty close to what they intended to do. It was just reauthorization of funds, and that was the funds where they fell short on the PPP, which was a very popular program. I've talked to a lot of our business people. A lot of them have gotten it. Some are still waiting for it, and they ran out of it. So I think it's very important that the U.S. government comes through and make sure those funds are available.
And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that he's not going to take up a phase 4 until the Senate comes back into session once again, meaning that this might be the last bill that we see at least for a couple weeks. Some of the banks are saying that this may last them maybe a couple days. Is the idea right now to get the economy back going before we deal with another stimulus package?
Well, I think that's the number one goal, is to get the economy up and running. And I think we can do that, with, just having very cautiously how we move forward. For the people that don't want to go out in public or socialize, don't. If you think you're at risk, don't. And I think Mitch McConnell's right to assess how much money we've put in there and really to get a better feel for how much more is needed. I think that's a wise thing to do.
And of course, a lot of your Democratic colleagues were hoping to put other things into that stimulus package. Voting was one, voting reforms, as
Right.
well as some infrastructure type of measures as well. It doesn't look like that's going to be in this package right now. Of course, we're still waiting on the House to pass it. But the president said he will sign it into law. He's looking to get relief out to those small businesses across the country. But when we talk about reopening the economy, what is the next measure in the immediate? Is it the more industry-based type of responses? Is it age response type of demographics in order who can go back to work? What's the next step when it comes to reopening the economy?
I think it's certainty for the American people, knowing that it's safe to go out. And I think we can progress that way by having tests available, and then have businesses open up so that they can rehire people, and then have that small influx of people coming into restaurants, movie theaters, going to the parks, and realizing that, they're not all going to catch corona. I mean, some people will, and we'll see probably a mild spike up. But I think if we're judicious about it and conscious about just health standards and hygienes, I think we'll do fine and we'll get this economy going, because that's really what needs to happen.
And you mentioned testing. That's another big portion of the bill that passed through the Senate that they addressed in
Right.
there as well. They said that they can't necessarily get the economy going without that testing. And that's a big part of the phase 1 opportunity by the White House to bring these economies back. Of course, the White House releasing its different guidelines of what would allow states to once again reopen their economies. But then we also see the president earlier this week is saying that he's going to issue an executive order suspending immigration to the United States for the time being, citing both the public health effects of that, but also the idea that we need to get Americans back to work before we can deal with growth brought on by illegal immigration. Do you think that was the right move by the president?
Yeah, I do. And I think especially when you look at other countries, they're not doing near the testing the United States is under President Trump's leadership. And so I think that's good to put that pause on there. But I was happy for him when he said that they were going to make sure that the H-2A workers, the temporary seasonal workers for our farmers and agriculture, will be able to come in. It's so much needed. I mean, agriculture's taken such a hard hit in this with the lack of employees available, the availability of employees, along with the effects COVID-19 has had on our ag sector. The restaurants shutting down, 60% of the meals were eaten outside of the home. And when we have milk trucks dumping milk and farmers plowing up bean fields and squash and tomatoes, it's not a healthy thing for American farmers. And I'm glad to see he's allowing the H-2A seasonal come in.
And that industry is seasonal, too. I think you're right to point that out because, for example, people who are being laid off right now, they're expected to go back to work. That's one measure of this. But come the summer, when a lot of the farming that you're talking about happens, we need to bring in more workers. That's something that's been an understanding for the past couple of years. It's something where those workers aren't always here necessarily during the winter, and
Right.
there's a higher demand in the summer. And earlier today, we see Secretary of State Mike Pompeo laying out more of a legal authority when it comes to the accountability on both China and the World Health Organization. When this is all said and done, do you hope to see some accountability from those two organizations, that being China and also the World Health Organization?
Yeah, I think he's correct on both of those. When you look at China, this was originally, there were evidence of this happening in November. and it was January when they really started ramping up. And they knew about this, yet they allowed 5 million people to leave the Wuhan province area to infect the rest of the world. So there has to be some accountability to this. And then the lack of sharing the original strain of the Corona 19 virus, they held off on doing that. I'm not sure they completely allowed that first one to go out. So, yeah, they do need to be held up. And then when you look at the Secretary General of WHO, Secretary Tedros,
Mhm.
who went over there and applauded China for doing such a great job. I think he was way off. He was doing that to placate China, and I think they need new leadership. And President Trump is right to withhold funds until they remove Secretary Tedros.
And what he did as well is China gave false information, and then he parroted that misinformation, and the rest of the world took that information, made decisions based off of it, and a lot of people are saying that it cost lives. A lot of the information that the WHO was putting out was downplaying the severity of this crisis when it comes
Sure.
to human-to-human transmission, the effectiveness of masks, and so a lot of people, especially the American people, polls show that they're looking for accountability when this is all said and done. So it'll be interesting to see how that accountability takes shape, but at this point, only time will tell. Representative Yoho, I always appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
All right, Alex, take care.